G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope that you are super well. Today's just a quick video. We are going to talk about firmware. There has been some firmware released and there is some firmware rumoured. Let's get into it. Yes, let's get into it. Let's start with firmware released. And lo and behold, the D850 released in 2017, so that must make it something like 5 to 6 years old, has just received a 1.30 firmware update. And what does it do? This update, Nikon D850 firmware version 1.3, has added portrait impressions balance to the photo and movie shooting menus. To view NEF RAW pictures taken using firmware version 1.3 or later on your computer, you will need some of the latest versions of NX Studio in order to be able to read these files. And also there's a bug fix which has fixed an issue that resulted in attempts to initiate lock mirror up for cleaning in the setup menu, causing the camera to display the message disable network connection in the Bluetooth menu and lock the mirror in the down position, preventing it being raised for cleaning. Nikon has also released firmware updates for all of last year's Tele primes. So that's the 404.5, the 402.8 TC, the 600 f4 with TC, and the 800 6.3. These firmware updates are bringing to these lenses, changing the focus to a linear focus mode. So when using the lens in linear focus mode, you can turn it a set distance and it will always turn the same amount with that set distance. So this is better for cinematographers, also perhaps for, say, macro photographers and situations like that. This feature is only available on the Z6 II, the Z7 II, and the Z9 cameras. And it's important to note, before updating the lens firmware, please confirm that the focal length for the built-in teleconverter is set to 1 times. The firmware cannot be updated when the focal length is set to 1.4 times using the teleconverter switch. Do not operate the teleconverter switch during the update. This is, of course, for the 400 and 600mm lenses. Does it look like that Nikon is rolling this out to all of their lenses? It's certainly going that way at this point in time. Perhaps there are some Z lenses that Nikon don't consider to be cinematic enough to warrant this. I'm not sure, we'll see. They seem to be adding these lenses at quite a pace. We just had 4 or 5 prime lenses added recently, just a few months ago, and now we are getting these Tele primes as well. Also, Nikon has updated some of their software with NX Studio and Picture Control Utility 2 being updated. This includes updates for the D850 firmware version 1.3, also adding support for the latest macOS Ventura. Also, the Picture Control Utility now runs natively on Mac OS Silicon. And for Mac users out there, this is a big deal. For those of us that use Mac Silicon, we know how ridiculously fast it runs and how little power it uses. This should also see Nikon's own applications running much faster than they have run in the past. Sometimes when using larger files, yes, the Nikon applications would run slower than their peers. So this may well bring them up to a point where they run quite similarly to their peers, which is something that I would be very excited to see. NX Studio version 1.3.1 has also been updated to accommodate the D850 1.3.0 software, and it has also been updated to Mac Silicon. I'm super pumped about this. I'm really looking forward to installing it, and I will let everybody know as soon as I've had a play how much faster it runs on native Apple Silicon. We've just had the announcement from Apple of the M2 MacBook Pros. These things seem to be absolute screamers, running super duper fast. The M1 MacBook Pro, which I already own, I own the entry-level version. It blows my mind. It is astonishingly fast. So I think this is a really big and good step for Nikon to be getting into the Apple Silicon space. I'm sure it will create some speeding up of Nikon's software. This latest version of NX Studio does cease support for Catalina on the Mac operating system. So you do have to keep your Mac OSs pretty much up to date. And it does state here in the bottom of these notes that there is improved responsiveness on specifically the Pro Display XDR monitors. Now, perhaps because they were XDR, higher dynamic range, they were running slower. That is something I can't test, but is very interesting. And from our friends at Nikon Rumours, they have put out a rumour stating that Nikon will continue to add further firmware support for the Z6 and the Z7. Now, it's not clear to me from this rumour whether that includes the Z6 II and the Z7 II. But just as an overall statement, we have all been very impressed by how the Z6 and the Z7 changed from the launch versions of those cameras. And it was around the firmware 3 and beyond, where the Z6 and the Z7 really started to change quite significantly when it came to things like autofocus from their launch versions. So this is a rumour. Nikon Rumours have a very good track record. Who knows? But Nikon certainly seem to be putting out a lot of firmware. And as Nikon Rumours states, it's pretty exciting to see that Nikon have continued to support the Z6, the Z7. Older DSLR cameras like the D850, D5, D6 have had updates recently. But of course, I think pretty much every Z camera has had firmware updates. Now, they have had differing levels of usefulness and added new features, for sure, with the Z9 being absolutely epic to everywhere in between. Like people from, say, the Z5 and the Z50 haven't seen that many firmware updates. And of course, I understand that Z6 II users, I am one of them, and Z7 II users are looking for more firmware updates. Beside the Z9, I suppose the Z6 and the Z7 have had the most updates. Who knows what's next in store, but I think what's interesting about this rumour is it's talking about the Z6 and the Z7. Personally, I wouldn't have thought, who knows how much further they can push those cameras, and hopefully that means it's the family of Z6s and the family of Z7s, not just version 1s. Who knows? It's an interesting rumour, and I look forward to hearing more and finding out more. And I do hope for the Z6 II and Z7 II owners that there is more in store for us. As I've talked about in a previous video that you can see here, I'm not sure how much there is that can be done. But of course, you know, when you're talking about computers, battery power, processors, clock speeds, and the multitude of elements that make up a modern mirrorless camera, there is so much that can be done to change what's going on inside that camera. You can turn down one aspect of a camera's functionality to boost up another, I suppose. I don't know how much of this stuff is hardware limited. I suppose ultimately what I'm saying and what I said in that previous video was, I feel like a lot was added to the Z6 II and the Z7 II, and maybe there were a lot of things there that people just didn't realize. But of course, code can always be optimized, rewritten, and priorities can be changed within the cameras. So maybe more can happen. And if this rumor is true, who would have thought even more could happen to the Z6 and the Z7, let alone their younger siblings? I can't wait to see how this story unfolds, along with, I'm sure, many of you out there. I would love to know your thoughts around all this stuff in the comments below. Please do let me know. It's been so good to see you here, and if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. Bye for now.